Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Regan, for being here today. Appreciate it. So I'm going to go back to the waters of the U.S. You said in your opening remark that you want a durable and certain rule, and that's going to be, I think we'd agree, is best for everybody, correct?
I'm sorry?
You want to have a durable rule, correct?
Yes,
And that would be best for everybody if people had certainty, whether it's farmers or ranchers or small business people, correct?
that's correct.
Yeah. And you're familiar with the 1972 Clean Water Act, correct?
Yes.
And do you know how many times in that act the word navigable water appears?
No, I haven't counted that.
It's 50 times. 50 times in that act it says navigable waters. And I'm going to pull up the Merriam-Webster's dictionary here of the definition of navigable. And it says navigable, 1A, deep enough and wide enough to afford passage to ships. Navigable waterways, that's 1A. Then it goes on to 1B, capable of being navigated, like navigable terrain, and then 2 is capable of being steered. But the definition is pretty clear. Now, I'm from a landlocked state, and we don't have lots of oceans around Nebraska. But to me, navigable means you can put a boat on it and go someplace. And you cannot do that from a pond on a farm. You can't do it from a roadside ditch that is temporary, and you can't do it from a puddle on a construction site. And yet, it seems that is what you were trying to do with this rule, is extend that very clear definition of navigable to waterways that are clearly not navigable. And you talked about exemptions, but you don't need exemptions when you're very clear when it's very clear what Congress's intent was. Congress's intent could not have been more clear. Navigable waters, where you can put a boat and take a ship and go someplace. And that does not count for the things that you're trying to extend it for. This, to me, seems to be an expansion of executive power. And by the way, don't take it personally, Mr. Regan, because you're not the first administration to try and expand executive power. But you're trying to expand the definition beyond what is here. And my question then goes to, with the Sackett case coming up, won't the Sackett case, is it your opinion the Sackett case is not actually going to clarify what navigable is with regard to these definitions?
Well, I really wish it was as simple as you've just laid out. But to your point, multiple administrations haven't gotten it right since 2015. The Supreme Court has weighed in multiple times. So it's not quite as clear as that picture you've painted. I do agree that the Sackett case will have some impact on the rule. And part of our calculation is this rule is designed to absorb whatever ruling the Sackett case renders so that we can move forward with that latest version of the law. The reason we did not wait is because we have a rule in place that will be impacted. We don't know how much, potentially, by Sackett, and we will adjust that rule and move forward. If we had waited until this ruling in June, we would have had to start a 2-year process, if not more, and that would have left a lot more uncertainty because of the vacature of the Trump rule and because the Obama rule was not in place.
So if the Sackett rule, the Supreme Court comes back and says, no, navigable actually means navigable as defined by Merriam-Webster here and what Congress's intent was in 1972, aren't you going to have to go through that 2-year waiting period all over again?
No, we believe that there are other aspects of WOTUS that we have already taken care of, and then we will adjust to that new definition. WOTUS is a little bit more expansive and impactful than just navigable waters. So we've taken care of all of those other externalities. We would adjust whatever decision we get from Sackett, and then we would be moving forward on what we predict to be a much shorter time frame.
Okay. I also note, and this is just a yes or no question, you mentioned the regional listening sessions. Didn't your staff clarify that those listening sessions don't count as official comments for the rule? Is that accurate?
Well, I think one of the reasons to do that, number one, is it never hurts to listen. Number two, we developed a very strong
It's a yes or no question, Mr. Regan.
Partnership with USDA.
Did your staff clarify that those don't count as official comments for the rule?
But it helps with implementation and execution.
But it doesn't count for official, is that right? Yes or no?
In terms of?
Yeah, I think your staff clarified that those comments don't count for the official comments on the rulemaking.
But they count towards how the rule is implemented and how we partner with USDA and the resources that USDA can bring to bear to help with the implementation of the rule. So those listening sessions were extremely valuable for both EPA and USDA.
Okay. So I want to switch gears on you real quick with the few seconds I've got left. With the new RFS rule, the EPA put out biomass guidelines for 3 years that are all below what EPA says is the 3.1 billion gallons, the capacity that the industry already has. Why did you set the targets below what the industry was already creating? And if you're going to do that, I would ask, do it for 1 year. Don't make it something that for 3 years when we know we're already at the capacity of 3.1 billion gallons and you've got it below 3 billion gallons. Why did you set it below that?
Well, I think that when we look at the lack of progress that have been made in the previous years, we had to go back and do the homework of a previous administration to catch up for 2020, 21, and 22. So we're looking at now we're looking at set rules in the future. We're trying to set these volumes for multiple years so that we can create some certainty in this space for the industry, which is what the industry has requested that we do. So I think the industry was pretty satisfied with where we landed on 2021, and now they're looking for that same trajectory and certainty in those out years.
Well, I'm talking about 2023, though. You're setting the amount below 3.1 billion gallons, which is what the industry capacity is already at. Why did you set the biomass goal below what the capacity is already at right now?
I'll take a look into sort of how to answer that question accurately.
Okay, thank you. Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right, Mr. Regan, as you know, actually, well, maybe you may not know, I was previously the governor of Nebraska, and I joined governors from across the Midwest to send you a letter to formally request permanently remove the 1 pound volatility waiver to allow states to sell gasoline, sell gasoline with E15 all year round. And again, this is an important point because as one of the things I love this committee because I get to talk about this, and now that Chairman Carper's gone, I can say this and he won't get on my case. Last time he corrected me and ended my time. But the, ethanol is something that will help consumers save money at the pump. I just filled up my tank at Hy-Vee a couple days ago when I was back in Nebraska, and I saved 60 cents a gallon. That was just E10. It helps clean up the environment. I know you know how much it reduces things like particulate matter and NOx and all that sort of stuff coming out. And then, of course, it's also great for our farmers and ranchers. And so we asked to be able to sell E15 all year round. And the Clean Air Act states that the administrator should publish the regulation resolving this action no later than 90 days after the receipt of a notification from a governor. But our renewable fuels industry and producers and refiners didn't receive anything until March 1st, and this should have been done in July. So can you tell me explain why it took more than the 90 days that's in the Clean Air Act to respond to this regulation, and what are your plans for E15 this summer? And I know that you've got a rule for next 24 to be able to allow, but can you talk to me a little bit about that, please?
Absolutely, and thank you for the letters. I understand why this is important, and I know it's important to you before you took this position. So we are excited about moving towards the waiver for 2024. We know the timing is different than what was initially requested, and I believe our folks were being responsive to fuel distribution companies so that they could be prepared for the next year and not this year. So, I recognize that we're on a slightly different clock. I'll get you a more specific answer as to what took longer than the 90 days to figure out. But I can say that we're excited about 2024. And for 2023, what we'll have to do is do what we did last year, which is assess it case by case as we get closer to that time.
All right, very good. And then I also want to get back to the biomass thing again real quickly, just because I do think it's important that as we look to take carbon out of the environment, we look at an all of the above strategy. And the biomass is important. And one of the things I wanted to call out in that is I was talking to people in the industry, and do you know, when we're talking about heavy trucks, the difference between the cost of a vehicle that can use the biodiesel versus an electric vehicle? Do you know what the ballpark difference is? It's pretty big. I take it by you're looking at me, you don't really know that answer. It's $180,000 to buy that tractor versus $500,000 to buy an electric tractor. So, and I think my colleague, Senator Mullen, pointed out that when you have an electric vehicle, it's a lot heavier, which means you're not going to be able to carry as much with you, and you're also not going to, we got the whole distribution issue, and it's also going to beat up the roads. So, again, that's one of the reasons why I think I really would like you to relook at that biomass thing, because I think that's going to be important for us as we look at an all-above kind of strategy. And then one other question I have is, getting back to your budget request, you're asking for 2,000 new people, and help me with this part of it. So I believe part of the justification, and correct me if I'm wrong, has to do with the Inflation Reduction Act and all the programs that are in that you're assigned to be able to tackle. When this goes through the budget process, like when I was governor of Nebraska and we would have a bill, my administration would score a bill to say, hey, if you pass this legislature, we're going to need X amount of people, and that would go into a fiscal note. Does that happen, or did that happen with this, so that when the Inflation Reduction Act was being talked about, you had a chance to weigh in and say, hey, if you pass this, I'm going to need 2,000 or 1,000 more people or anything like that? Is that part of the process?
We can provide technical assistance as these pieces of legislation are developed. I'll just give you some real numbers. When we think about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, 0.5% of that is for administrative. And so when we look at some of these bills, like TSCA, for example, that was passed in 2016, some of these bills are passed and they don't give the agency the adequate resources to keep pace with what the legislation requires. That's just part of the reality. It's not new with the Inflation Reduction Act. Again, go back to TSCA, we're facing that similar situation. And so that happens, and we try to reconcile some of this through the budget process, and a good deal of that is what we're trying to do now.
So we need to do a better job on our side of the house, is what I hear, making sure that we're consulting with different agencies to make sure we get an accurate budget reading when we're passing these bills. Is that a fair statement?
We do the best that we can to provide the technical assistance to any piece of legislation to say this would be the human capital impact to our agency, along with what we think we need to execute or implement that legislation.
All right. Thank you very much.